We have smartphones and radios and the internet here, whereas so many places around the world you have to walk hours to get any kind of information, to get any kind of communication with the outside world. And that can be extremely limiting if you're trying to figure out what's an appropriate price for the crops that you're growing, or if you're trying to understand the political climate that's going on, or you're trying to understand disasters that may be happening. Information is critical. Mobility is something that we take for granted. Maybe more in Los Angeles than almost anywhere. I drove for hours in congested traffic to get here, and was thinking to myself about how we are so mobility dependent in this country, but it's something we take for granted. You hop in your car and you drive for hours, but you're on the other side of the state, whereas a project I worked on recently in Tanzania was focused on developing a hand cart for farmers, and these farmers, many of them have never owned a wheel. And we think of the wheel as one of the oldest, most important forms of technology, but these people are still carrying everything on their head or in their arms or on their back. And it's really remarkable to think that we so easily meet our needs using cars and bicycles and everything, whereas mobility can be a huge issue in the developing world, especially when you're talking about trying to move through rural locations where people are going on terrible roads for hours and hours and hours to get food or water or health. Enterprise is always a really interesting one because it's connected to everything. And we in the United States have this huge economy and all of these control systems and facilitators to enterprise. The most obvious one is banking system. You all have access to credit. Some of your credit is probably better than others, but at the end of the day, you can borrow money. You could start a business, borrow money to start that business, pay the money back, and then have something you've actually built. Whereas so many places around the world, there's no such thing as banking. There's no place to save your money except under the mattress. And if you want to start a business, well, unless you can borrow that money from your neighbors or your family, you don't have any access to credit. And if any of you are following kind of economic discussions around the world, credit is a huge issue for any kind of economy. And it's funny to think of that, but credit is a form of technology. It's this form of a tool that a financial instrument that we use. Education here in the United States is free, which I always listen to a number of my relatives always complain about schools and teachers and how they're not good for anything. But at the end of the day, one of the most amazing things we did in the United States is form a public school system and educate everyone. Whereas around the world, so many places only have private education. So if you want to send your kids to school, you have to pay for it. And you have to buy the school uniforms and the books, and it can be a huge burden on a family. So often, families will send one of their 8 children to school, and then all the family's hopes are riding on that one child, in the hopes that that one child will grow up and be able to in turn support the family. So education is this other kind of technology and tool that we have such easy access to. And then the last one that is often talked about as well in the kind of current environmental climate is energy, and where our energy comes from and how we use that energy and the choices that we're making with regards to that energy. We have the advantage of having an electrical grid and the ability to flip on a light switch, whereas so many places around the world it's kerosene based. That's what I see everywhere. This is my first prop opportunity. This is a little kerosene lamp that's super common in Africa, and I'm sure other places around the world. And it's kind of like a single serving kerosene lamp. It's made out of an old beer bottle or a beer can that is filled with kerosene. You put a wick in it, and then this is your source of light in your home. But there's a number of problems with that. First, kerosene is actually really expensive, which is why they have to buy it in single serving applications like that, because they can't afford to buy a whole bunch of it. But the other issue is that it's dangerous. They can tip over and burn your house down, and they generate a lot of pollution. And that doesn't, you think of pollution as being a big deal on a global scale, but pollution is actually a really big deal on a home scale as well, because one of the major problems around the world is actually indoor air pollution generated by kerosene lamps and indoor cooking over open fires. In fact, it's I'm not a huge fan of statistics, but this one always kind of blows me away, is that the second leading cause of death of children under 5 in the world is pneumonia due to indoor air pollution. So it's this massive killer that is so rarely talked about, and it's all because people don't have access to clean, reliable energy. And that's only one example. I mean, so many people don't have lights, or they have to literally walk hours and pay exorbitant rates to charge their cell phone. Imagine if you were paying a quarter of your monthly income on charging your cell phone and buying kerosene to light your home. It's just it's a really huge dichotomy. And I think that the reason I walk through all of this, and kind of the point I'm trying to make, is that there's this huge difference in the technology that we use and the way that we meet our basic needs here, and the technology that people around the world are using and the way that they're meeting their basic needs. And so often this conversation stops at a discussion of resources. Those people don't have the resources, they don't have the money, they don't have the income, they can't afford this stuff, so they don't have it. But that's a really dramatic oversimplification of the situation, and it's not the whole story. Because one of the things that I've learned in my work, and I don't know if Evan could probably speak to this as well, is that there are very few people in this world that have zero money, like nothing. They do exist. There are those people who have no money whatsoever, but much more common is people with very little money. There's actually a book that's very widely talked about in the international development space called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, which is a somewhat polemical piece, but the idea being that there's billions of people who have a little bit of money, and if people could tap into that, you could actually make billions of dollars. So I think what really illustrates that well is the fact that no matter where you go in the world, almost everyone has a cell phone. And that's a really weird reality that you're not necessarily prepared for. But you'll go to remote Tanzania and you'll be hanging out with nomadic the Maasai warrior hunter people, and they're sitting there with cell phones. And you're hanging out in really remote regions in all around Africa and Southeast Asia, or wherever the case may be, and people have cell phones. India, they're extremely common. They're twice as common as toilets. So everyone has a cell phone. So the reality when you think about that is, hold it. If these people have zero money, what the hell are they doing with a cell phone? And so you start realizing that there is a little bit of money, and that there has to be more to this story than simply these people don't have the resources to afford the technology they need to meet their basic needs. So what I think part of the answer to that is the fact that people are paying attention to our needs here. We have money, so companies like Apple or Google or Toyota or whoever are designing products actively to meet your needs. They're saying, you need this kind of cell phone, or you have told me that you need this kind of car or bicycle or whatever the case may be. So they take that information, they actively design to meet your needs, to meet your income bracket, so that you can afford it, and so that it'll fit into your life in some sort of meaningful way. But people in the developing world don't have that attention. They don't have people actually actively trying to consider what their needs are and how best to meet them. So what they're stuck with are kind of two sources of products and technologies that they can use to meet their needs. One is local artisans who they have a shop and they use very limited materials and very limited technical knowledge to fashion some sort of solution. And there's an amazing plethora of really innovative, creative solutions you can see all around the developing world to meet problems, but they're always kludged together in kind of custom, one-off solutions to meet a specific need. No one's doing it at scale except for NGOs, aid organizations, nonprofits focused on trying to help improve these people's lives, which is fantastic, but the problem is that they're the ones who are buying the product, but they're not the ones who are using it. So very frequently, whoever is designing a product is very interested in what the Red Cross thinks, or what the UN thinks, or what USAID thinks, but they're not so concerned with what refugees in Darfur think of the product. So the needs of the refugees in Darfur, or the needs of the Andean people in Bolivia aren't really considered in designing the product. It's focused more on the needs of whoever's buying it and distributing it. So it's this whole system where no one's actually looking at what these people want and need and actively creating products for them to help them meet their needs. So the lesson to take from all of that, because I know it's a lot of me just kind of rambling on, is the fact that there are people who are trying to design products to help people meet their needs around the world. And the fascinating statistic is that 95% of the products that are designed for people in the developing world fail. Fail in the sense that they don't have the desired outcome. Maybe 100 or 1,000 people are using it, but 10,000 or 100,000 people aren't using it. They're not actually having like a big impact on the problem of sanitation or clean water or health or whatever the case may be. And that's an amazing statistic if you think about it. Like 95% of the attempts don't work. And I, as an engineer and as a designer, have to ask, why is that?
Do you also ask, how does that compare to the U.S.? What percentage of products that U.S. inventors come up with actually make it into common use?
Though that's a really great question. I don't have an answer for it, to be frank, but I think it's really important. What we do know, however, is that there are millions of products that are being tried constantly, and that a few kind of the cream rises to the top, so to speak. But at the end of the day, there are just like, we have, like, you go to the grocery store, and I know my experience at least is like, I'm overwhelmed with the choices. Like, how am I possibly going to choose a preserve here among all of the thousands of choices of jellies and jams? So you're absolutely right. I don't know what that number is, but I do know that that a huge number of the attempts in the developing world aren't going anywhere, and that as a result, a lot of people don't have the technology and the products that they need to accomplish their basic goals of trying to like live a relatively healthy, happy life. So when I'm asking why are these things failing, I'm looking at it from a design perspective, and I see there were, let's see what I write down. I wrote down 4 different reasons that products are often failing. The first is that, well, they're all contextual. Is that people very rarely have it in their head who they're designing for and who they're developing a product for or a solution. The first limitation is often the physical environment. I've heard a lot of stories of medical equipment, for example, that are donated to clinics in foreign countries that have the wrong electrical plug. Like, they'll be designed with an American plug, and it doesn't fit into the South African plug. So they get these incubators, and then they just sit there because they can't plug them in. And so it's like all of this really important, valuable, and incredibly helpful medical equipment that just sits there because they can't plug it into the wall. Another one is one that I've seen a lot of is bicycle ambulances. Bicycle ambulances could be great. You know, you have all these mobility issues and people are having trouble getting to clinics. Well, we could use a bicycle ambulance. That would be great. Except that bicycle ambulances are so often like 2 bicycles wide. You know, they're like yay wide so a person can lay down between 2 wheels, but they're expected to go on these incredibly rocky paths that are like single track. Like if any of you are mountain bikers, it's like the idea of trying to take this bicycle ambulance on a single track, like rocky, like 1 person wide trail just doesn't work. So people who are like coming up with these solutions aren't really considering the physical context. Then probably the most important is the cultural context, and this I could actually go on and on talking about the cultural context. But I'll give you a few examples of people not really clearly considering the cultural context of a technology. One of my favorites is a company called Kickstarter, and they developed Kickstart, and they developed what they call a treadle pump, and Evan actually has a model of it out here in the water area. It's a pump that you can actually stand on and use it as a stair stepper to pump water for irrigation. A really simple, super straightforward, inexpensive device that can like dramatically increase the your crop yields if you're growing crops. But when Kickstart first introduced this in Kenya, they really didn't take off. They didn't have a lot of success with it. Nobody was buying it, and nobody could figure out why, because the pump worked really well and it was well within their price range, until somebody realized that women weren't using it, but women worked on the farms all the time, and they started asking questions about that and realized that to work the treadle pump, you had to take these relatively big steps, right? And all of the women were wearing skirts, and that the length of step that you had to take required you to lift your leg to a point that was considered improper in the culture.